2 years after first contact, the galactic balance of power had fundamentally shifted, and the Galactic Council formally recognized Earth as a sovereign member world with full voting rights and defensive guarantees, which was something that had previously been reserved for species with millennia of spacefaring experience. But humanity had earned their place through superior weapons technology rather than ancient tradition. Admiral Sullivan now commanded the Sol Defense Fleet, which consisted of a growing armada of human vessels that served as both protector of Earth and deterrent to any potential aggressors. And the railgun technology had evolved far beyond simple kinetic weapons into smart projectiles with guidance systems and multi-stage accelerators that could engage targets at extreme ranges with surgical precision. The defensive networks that surrounded Earth and extended throughout the solar system could intercept incoming threats with accuracy that amazed alien military observers, because human targeting computers could calculate the trajectories of multiple projectiles simultaneously and engage dozens of targets at once with weapons that never seemed to miss their intended marks. Dr. Morrison received the Galactic Prize for scientific achievement in a ceremony held on Arcturus Prime, and his acceptance speech was attended by representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy who had come to hear what the human scientist would say about his species' contributions to galactic knowledge and military technology. Morrison explained to the packed auditorium that humanity's contribution to galactic civilization went far beyond their weapons technology, because they had demonstrated that there were always alternative paths to progress, and that conventional wisdom was not always the best guide for solving complex problems. The former enemies who had attempted to conquer Earth had gradually become cautious allies, as they realized that cooperation offered better prospects than continued hostility, and General Vexthol, who had recovered from his injuries during the failed invasion, now worked closely with human engineers to develop new technologies. The hybrid defense systems that emerged from human hegemony, collaboration combined energy shield technology with kinetic weapons principles and created defensive platforms that were more powerful than anything either species could have built independently, and which served as models for other joint research projects throughout the galaxy. Captain Bell, who had been promoted to Admiral after his successful defense of Luna Base, now commanded the training facility, where human tactical doctrine was taught to officers from allied alien civilizations, and his students learned that sometimes the most effective solutions were also the simplest ones, involving basic physics principles applied with human creativity. The galaxy slowly adapted to the new reality, where traditional military strategies had become obsolete because human weapons could destroy any conventional fleet before it could get close enough to pose a threat, and this forced every civilization to reconsider their approaches to both warfare and diplomacy. The Galactic Council's xenobiology expert Dr. Zaranth published her landmark study titled The Human Paradox: How a Species Mastered the Complex by Perfecting the Simple, and her research revolutionized galactic thinking about technological development and species assessment, because it proved that advancement did not always follow predictable patterns. Captain Rodriguez, who now served as Earth's permanent ambassador to the Galactic Council, often told new alien contacts that humans had succeeded by remembering the most important principle of physics, which was that mass times velocity equals a very bad day for anyone who happened to be standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The trading networks that connected human space with the rest of the galaxy flourished, as alien civilizations discovered that humanity produced not only superior weapons technology, but also innovative solutions to problems that had puzzled galactic scientists for centuries, and human engineers became highly sought-after consultants for major construction projects. Dr. Carter's research team continued developing new applications for magnetic acceleration technology, and their work led to breakthroughs in space transportation, manufacturing, and resource extraction that made human space colonies the most efficient and productive in the galaxy. The neutral trading station at Kepler 442b became a major diplomatic hub where human representatives negotiated agreements with dozens of alien civilizations, and the station's administrator, Fosseric, discovered that hosting human delegations was extremely profitable because other species were willing to pay premium prices for access to human technology and expertise. Admiral Sullivan established diplomatic protocols that ensured human Military superiority would be used only for defensive purposes and to protect smaller civilizations from aggressive neighbors. But the mere existence of human weapons served as a deterrent that helped maintain peace throughout large sectors of the galaxy. The Sol Defense Academy graduated its first class of alien officers who had learned human tactical methods and strategic thinking, and these graduates returned to their home civilizations with new understanding of how unconventional approaches to military problems could achieve results that traditional methods could not match. The age of human isolation had ended completely, and the age of human influence had begun as Earth became a major power in galactic politics, despite having achieved spaceflight only recently, compared to civilizations that had been exploring the stars for thousands of years. Military strategists throughout the galaxy now included standard assessments of potential human involvement in their planning, because any conflict that attracted human attention could be ended quickly by railgun strikes that would eliminate entire fleets before they knew they were under attack. The hegemony and Kethmore governments publicly announced new defensive alliances with Earth, and these agreements served as examples for other civilizations that wanted to ensure they would never face human weapons as enemies rather than allies. Dr. Morrison often reflected on how quickly everything had changed since that first alien invasion attempt, and he realized that humanity's greatest strength was not their weapons technology, but their willingness to think differently about problems that everyone else had accepted as unsolvable. The galactic community gradually recognized that human innovation extended far beyond military applications as Earth scientists made breakthroughs in medicine, agriculture, energy production, and space exploration that benefited civilizations throughout the galaxy. Commander Williams, who had led the first human diplomatic mission beyond the solar system, now commanded a fleet of exploration vessels that carried human technology and scientific knowledge to distant worlds, where they established research stations and cultural exchange programs. The transformation of galactic civilization continued as more species adopted human approaches to problem-solving and technological development, which led to an unprecedented period of innovation and progress that historians would later describe as the beginning of a new age in galactic history. Admiral Bell concluded his final report on human military doctrine by noting that their success had come not from superior resources or ancient wisdom, but from their willingness to question assumptions and find new solutions to old problems, and this lesson had applications far beyond warfare. The defeat of the hegemony invasion fleet sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, as news of humanity's impossible weapons spread from world to world, and within months, every major military power was desperately trying to reverse engineer human railgun technology from the few pieces of battle debris that had survived the devastating kinetic impacts. Dr. Alex Carter, who had been one of Dr. Morrison's best students, now led the team responsible for developing Earth's next-generation weapons, and he reported to the Defense Council that alien intelligence services were working around the clock to understand how humans had managed to create magnetic acceleration systems that could launch projectiles at relativistic speeds. The problem that the aliens faced was that they were still thinking in terms of energy projection rather than kinetic physics, and their scientists kept trying to modify their existing energy weapons to achieve similar results instead of understanding that railgun technology represented a completely different approach to warfare that required abandoning many of their basic assumptions about how advanced weapons should work. Meanwhile, the hegemony had formed a desperate alliance with the Kethmore Empire, and they were pooling their resources to develop countermeasures against human weapons. But their new experimental shields that were designed to deflect solid projectiles proved disappointing in field tests, because the sheer kinetic energy of human railgun projectiles overwhelmed any barrier that they could construct. Commander Tracy Williams piloted the first human ship to venture beyond the solar system since the failed alien invasion, and her vessel was equipped with the latest railgun arrays along with a message of cautious diplomacy. But her arrival at the neutral trading station of Kepler 442b caused immediate panic among the alien merchants and diplomats who had heard terrifying stories about human weapons. The station administrator, who was a nervous Altarian named Vosserick, quickly arranged for separate docking areas to keep the human ship away from potential enemies, and word spread rapidly through the station's corridors that the humans had arrived with, their impossible weapons, and that everyone should be very careful not to provoke them. Tracy broadcast a message explaining that her mission was peaceful and that humanity sought trade relationships and cultural exchange with other galactic civilizations. But she also made it clear that her ship was fully armed and prepared to defend itself against any species that might mistake human desires for peace as a sign of weakness. The alien traders and diplomats had never encountered a situation where a single ship from a supposedly primitive species could pose a genuine threat to an entire space station. But the reports from the failed invasion of Earth had convinced everyone that underestimating human capabilities was extremely dangerous. Carter's research team continued their work on improving railgun technology, and they discovered that the magnetic acceleration principles could be applied to many purposes beyond warfare, including asteroid mining operations that became trivially simple when you could launch precision projectiles across millions of kilometers with perfect accuracy. Space construction projects accelerated dramatically, as materials could be delivered to any location in the solar system with railgun launches that were far more efficient than chemical rockets, and soon, human engineering crews were building structures in space at a pace that amazed alien observers who visited the Sol system. The Kethmore Empire secretly approached several other galactic powers with a proposal to form a coalition that could overwhelm human defenses through sheer numbers. But most civilizations declined to participate because they had studied the battle reports and concluded that even a massive fleet would likely be destroyed before it could get close enough to Earth to pose a real threat. General Vexthol, who had barely survived the destruction of his invasion fleet, now worked with human engineers in a research program designed to combine hegemony energy, shield technology with human kinetic weapons principles. And while the cooperation was awkward at first, both sides gradually realized that they could achieve better results working together than they ever could as enemies. The hybrid defense systems that emerged from this collaboration were more powerful than anything either species could have created independently, because they combined the best features of energy manipulation and magnetic acceleration technologies into weapons platforms that redefined what was possible in space warfare. Admiral Bell, who had been promoted after his successful defense of Luna Base, now oversaw training programs where human tactical doctrine was taught to crews from allied alien civilizations, and the galaxy slowly began to understand that the most effective military solutions were often the simplest ones, involving accelerating chunks of metal to incredible speeds. The Galactic Council's Military Assessment Division published a comprehensive study of human weapons technology that forced every species to reconsider their basic assumptions about technological development. Because humanity had proven that there were multiple paths to advanced civilization, and that following conventional wisdom was not always the best approach. Captain Rodriguez, who now served as Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, found herself in the unusual position of representing a species that everyone respected and feared, because human weapons had fundamentally changed the balance of power in the galaxy and made traditional military strategies obsolete. The trading station at Kepler 442b became a hub for human diplomatic and commercial activities, as alien civilizations sent representatives to negotiate agreements with the species that had revolutionized warfare, and several major powers offered technology exchanges in hopes of gaining access to railgun principles. Dr. Morrison received the Galactic Prize for Scientific Achievement, and his acceptance speech emphasized that humanity's contribution to galactic civilization went far beyond weapons technology, because they had demonstrated the importance of exploring alternative approaches to complex problems, instead of assuming that established methods were always superior. The former enemies who had attempted to conquer Earth gradually became cautious allies, as they realized that cooperating with humanity offered better prospects than continuing to view them as threats, and joint research projects began producing advances that benefited all participating civilizations. Admiral Sullivan established the Sol Defense Academy, where officers from across the galaxy could study human military innovations, and the curriculum emphasized the importance of thinking creatively about warfare, instead of relying on conventional tactics that might prove ineffective against unconventional enemies. The galaxy was slowly learning to adapt to a new reality where a species that had been dismissed as primitive just a few years earlier now possessed the most effective weapons technology known to galactic civilization. and where traditional assumptions about military superiority had been completely overturned by human ingenuity and determination. Every military strategist in the galaxy now included detailed assessments of human capabilities in their strategic planning, because ignoring the possibility of human intervention in any conflict had become a mistake that could lead to catastrophic consequences for anyone who made it. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours of receiving General Vexthal's incredible battle report, and Council Elder Thisara presided over the assembly, with her ancient eyes showing the skepticism that came from thousands of years of experience dealing with exaggerated military reports from commanders who were trying to explain away their failures in combat. The great chamber that housed the council was filled with representatives from hundreds of species, and each one of them had heard stories about the disaster that had befallen the hegemony invasion fleet, but none of them could quite believe that a primitive species like humanity could possess weapons technology that was supposedly more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Science Director Quintel stood before the assembled delegates and declared that the human weapon reports were obviously impossible, because no species in the recorded history of the galaxy had ever developed railgun technology without first mastering energy manipulation systems, and the magnetic field requirements alone should have been beyond the understanding of any civilization that was still using chemical propulsion for their spacecraft. Dr. Morrison appeared before the council via holographic transmission from his laboratory on Earth, and behind him, the assembled aliens could see data streams showing real-time readings from the railgun network that humanity had apparently been building in secret for years, while the galaxy assumed they were still struggling with basic spaceflight technology. The human scientist began his presentation by explaining that the Galactic Council had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human technological development, because they had assumed that all species followed the same path toward advanced civilization, and that certain technologies had to be developed in a specific order that could not be changed or accelerated. Morrison gestured toward technical specifications that were now being displayed for all the council members to examine, and the data showed magnetic acceleration systems that were far more sophisticated than anything in the galactic database, and which appeared to be based on completely different scientific principles than the energy weapons that most civilizations had developed. First Admiral Sullivan joined the transmission from her command center and added that humanity had now deployed defensive railgun platforms throughout their solar system, and that any hostile approach toward Earth would be met with kinetic strikes that the current defensive technology used by galactic civilizations could not counter effectively. The council chamber fell silent as the implications of this statement became clear, because if these humans were telling the truth, then they had essentially made themselves immune to conquest by any force that relied on conventional weapons and energy shields, and this represented a complete disruption of the established military balance that had existed in the galaxy for millennia. War Master Keltheron of the Dominion fleets finally broke the silence by asking whether the humans were actually threatening the entire Galactic Council with their supposedly superior weapons technology, and his tone suggested that he found the very idea of such a threat to be both insulting and amusing. Captain Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Fleet Admiral after the successful defense of Earth, answered calmly that humanity threatened no one who approached them with peaceful intentions, but that any species which attempted to conquer or enslave humanity would discover that their primitive weapons were more than sufficient to defend themselves against even the most advanced galactic military forces. The delegates began arguing among themselves about whether the human claims could possibly be true, because the scientific evidence seemed to support their statements, but the implications were so enormous that accepting them would mean acknowledging that a species they had dismissed as primitive had somehow leapfrogged ahead of civilizations that had been developing technology for thousands of years. Elder Thisara called for order and requested that the humans provide additional proof of their capabilities, because extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and the council needed to understand exactly what kind of threat or opportunity these railgun weapons represented. For the future of galactic civilization, Der Morrison activated a live demonstration feed that showed one of Earth's railgun installations firing a test shot at an asteroid in the outer solar system, and the delegates watched in stunned silence as The tungsten projectile crossed millions of kilometers in a matter of minutes and completely vaporized a space rock that was larger than most of their capital ships. The energy calculations that accompanied the demonstration showed impact forces that exceeded anything in the galactic military database, and the accuracy of the targeting system was so precise that it could hit objects moving at high speeds across interplanetary distances with no difficulty at all. Science Director Quintel requested access to the technical specifications for the human magnetic acceleration systems, and Dr. Morrison politely declined because humanity was not yet ready to share weapons technology with civilizations that had recently attempted to conquer them. But he offered to provide basic scientific papers that explained the underlying physics principles. The council members realized that they were facing a completely new situation, because for the first time in galactic history, a primitive species had developed weapons that were superior to anything possessed by the established galactic powers, and this meant that all existing military strategies and diplomatic assumptions would have to be completely reconsidered. Admiral Sullivan pointed out that humanity was willing to engage in peaceful trade and diplomatic relations with any species that approached them honestly, but that they would never again allow themselves to be threatened by alien invasion fleets because their defensive capabilities were now more than adequate to deal with any conceivable military threat. The debate continued for hours as different species tried to understand how their carefully ordered galaxy had suddenly been disrupted by a group of beings who should have been easy targets for conquest, but who instead possessed weapons that made them essentially unconquerable by conventional means. War Master Keltheron suggested that the Council should authorize a massive combined fleet to test the human defenses and determine whether their weapons were really as effective as they claimed, but several other delegates pointed out that such an action would likely result in the complete destruction of any attacking force based on what they had already witnessed. Elder Thisara finally called for a formal vote on whether to recognize humanity as a sovereign member of the galactic community with full defensive rights, and the motion passed by a narrow margin because most delegates concluded that making enemies of these humans would be far more dangerous than accepting them as equals. Dr. Morrison thanked the Council for their wisdom and assured them that humanity looked forward to peaceful relations with all galactic civilizations, but that they would continue to strengthen their defensive capabilities because they had learned that the galaxy was a dangerous place where peaceful species needed to be prepared to defend themselves. The session ended with a formal declaration that Earth was now under the protection of galactic law, and that any unauthorized military action against humanity would be considered an act of war against the entire Galactic Council. But everyone in the chamber knew that the real protection came from the railgun platforms that could destroy any attacking fleet before it got close enough to threaten the human homeworld. Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his massive warship and looked at the blue planet below him through the view screen with cold yellow eyes that showed no emotion at all as he studied the third planet from the small star that these primitive beings called Sol, and which his people had been watching for many decades now while gathering information about the species that lived there and called themselves humans, and who seemed to be stuck in what his science team described as an early stage of technological development that made them perfect targets for what the Galactic Council politely called integration, but which everyone knew really meant conquest and slavery under alien rule. The intelligence reports that lay scattered across his command table told a story that made Admiral Zethkar feel almost sorry for these humans, because they were still using primitive chemical explosives to launch small pieces of metal at their enemies, and their spaceships moved through the void using controlled explosions of burning fuel, which was laughably primitive compared to the energy weapons and gravity drives that every civilized species in the galaxy had been using for thousands of years. And yet these humans seemed proud of their crude technology, as if they had accomplished something meaningful instead of just proving how far behind they really were. Dr. Jake Morrison wiped sweat from his forehead as he stood in the underground laboratory that had been carved deep into the Nevada desert, where no satellites or spy drones could see what his small team of engineers and scientists had been working on for the past 3 years, in complete secrecy, because Earth Defense Command had ordered them to keep their most advanced weapons research hidden from any alien observers who might be watching from space and waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves and demand surrender from what they surely thought was a helpless and backward species. The railgun, prototype that filled most of the laboratory chamber, looked nothing like the energy weapons that appeared in science fiction movies, because it was essentially a very long metal tube surrounded by powerful electromagnets that could accelerate a tungsten rod to incredible speeds using magnetic fields instead of chemical explosives. And while the basic physics had been understood for decades, the engineering challenges of building a weapon that could work reliably in combat conditions had taken years to solve, and even now Jake was not completely sure that their design would work when tested against real alien technology. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded the orbital defense station that circled Earth like a metal moon, and from her position in the command center, she could see the blue curve of her home planet below while monitoring the sensor readings that showed nothing unusual in the space around Earth. But she knew that alien scout ships had been detected at the edge of the solar system, and everyone expected that first contact would happen soon and probably not in the peaceful way that scientists and diplomats had always hoped it would. The crew of her station had been training for months with weapons that officially did not exist because the government wanted to maintain the illusion that humanity was still using only conventional technology, while secretly preparing defenses that might give them a fighting chance against whatever alien forces eventually arrived. And Lisa spent her days reviewing battle plans that assumed the enemy would have superior technology and overwhelming numbers, but might underestimate human determination and ingenuity. General Vexthal received the final intelligence briefing about Earth as his invasion fleet moved into position just outside the detection range of human sensors, and the report confirmed what he had expected to hear, which was that these humans posed no significant military threat to his ships, because their most powerful weapons were nuclear missiles that moved at a tiny fraction of light speed and energy beams that could barely damage the armor plating on his smallest scout vessels. His fleet consisted of 50 warships, each one larger than anything humans had ever built, and equipped with shields that could deflect energy weapons and armor that could absorb kinetic impacts from any projectile that these primitives might fire at them. And his crew was already making jokes about how quickly this conquest would be completed, because previous invasions of primitive worlds had usually ended within hours, once the local population realized how outmatched they were. The plan was simple and had worked on dozens of other worlds over the centuries, which was to appear suddenly above the major population centers and demand immediate surrender, while demonstrating superior firepower by destroying a few military targets, and most species quickly accepted the inevitable rather than face complete destruction of their civilization. But General Vexthal had a feeling that these humans might be stubborn enough to require a more forceful demonstration before they accepted their new status as subjects of the Galactic Empire. Dr. Morrison made final adjustments to the targeting system, while his team ran through the power-up sequence that would charge the massive capacitors needed to fire their railgun. And even though they had tested smaller versions of this weapon many times, he felt nervous about using it in actual combat, because the calculations showed that their tungsten projectiles would hit targets with more kinetic energy than a nuclear warhead, but in a much smaller package that could punch through almost any known material. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in the command center of Earth Defense Command and watched the sensor displays that showed dozens of large objects approaching Earth from the outer solar system and moving at speeds that no human technology could match, and she knew that the moment she had been preparing for during her entire military career was finally arriving, and that the next few hours would determine whether humanity remained free or became slaves to an alien empire. The communication from the approaching fleet was exactly what everyone had expected, which was a demand for immediate and unconditional surrender, delivered in perfect English, that the aliens had obviously learned from intercepted human broadcasts, and the tone was arrogant and dismissive, as if these invaders considered humans to be nothing more than animals that needed to be trained to obey their new masters. Kate looked at the weapons status display that showed green lights next to systems that officially did not exist, and she thought about all the years of secret research and development that had led to this moment when humanity would either prove that underestimating them was a fatal mistake or discover that their hidden weapons were not enough to overcome superior alien technology in numbers. She opened a communication channel to the alien fleet and spoke in a calm voice that gave no hint of the fear and uncertainty that she felt inside, because she knew that showing weakness now would only encourage these invaders to believe that conquest would be easy and quick. General Vexthol laughed when he heard the human female's response through the communication system of his flagship, because these primitive beings actually believed they could threaten his mighty fleet with their crude weapons, and he turned to his weapons officer and ordered him to prepare a demonstration that would show these humans exactly how outmatched they were by destroying one of their orbital stations with a single shot from his ship's main energy cannon. The shields that protected his flagship had been designed by the greatest military engineers in the galaxy and could absorb the full output of any energy weapon that a primitive species might possess, while his armor plating was made from materials that these humans had probably never even heard of, and which could withstand impacts from projectiles moving at any speed that chemical propulsion could achieve. He was still laughing and explaining to his bridge crew how quickly this conquest would be completed when the first railgun projectile struck his flagship with the force of a small star and punched through his supposedly impenetrable shields as if they were made of thin paper, and continued through his armor plating without slowing down at all before penetrating deep into the heart of his ship, where it released kinetic energy equivalent to several nuclear weapons in the space of a few microseconds. Dr. Morrison watched the telemetry data streaming across his computer screens as the tungsten rod that his railgun had accelerated to 15% of light speed completed its journey from the hidden launcher in Nevada to the alien flagship orbiting high above Earth, and the energy release was so massive that it showed up on every sensor on the planet as a brilliant flash of light that briefly outshone the sun. The alien ship that had seemed so mighty and threatening just moments before simply ceased to exist as the incredible kinetic energy of the railgun projectile converted most of its mass into superheated plasma that expanded outward in a glowing sphere of destruction that could be seen by anyone on Earth who happened to be looking up at the right moment, and even the debris that survived the initial impact was moving so fast that it burned up in Earth's atmosphere like shooting stars. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Bell had been waiting for this moment ever since he was assigned to the secret lunar base that officially did not exist, and when he received the order to fire his railgun array, he targeted 3 of the largest alien ships in the invasion fleet and sent a spread of tungsten projectiles toward them at velocities that the aliens had never encountered before, because no species in their experience had ever thought to use magnetic acceleration to launch solid projectiles at relativistic speeds. The aliens had built their shields to deflect energy beams and absorb the impact of slower projectiles, but they had never considered the possibility that someone might accelerate chunks of metal to such incredible velocities that the kinetic energy alone would be enough to vaporize their ships, and their defensive systems were completely useless against weapons that approached the speed of light. Captain Rodriguez led the counterattack from her orbital station as soon as the hidden Earth Defense Command weapons revealed themselves, and her fleet of human ships that had been disguised as civilian vessels suddenly activated their own railgun systems and began firing projectiles at the surviving alien ships that were still trying to understand what had just happened to their supposedly invincible invasion force. Each human ship carried what the aliens would later describe as impossible weapons, because their science told them that no species could master magnetic acceleration technology without first developing advanced energy manipulation systems, and yet these primitive humans had somehow built weapons that could launch solid projectiles at speeds that violated everything the aliens thought they knew about technological development. The hegemony fleet that had arrived with 50 massive warships and complete confidence in their ability to conquer yet another primitive world found themselves reduced to only 12 damaged vessels in less than 10 minutes of combat, and their crews were panicking because their shields and armor were useless against weapons that should not have existed. General Vexthul found himself commanding the battle from a heavily damaged cruiser after his flagship had been completely destroyed by the first human attack, and he watched in horror as his remaining ships tried desperately to retreat beyond the range of these impossible weapons, while human projectiles continued to streak through space at velocities that made dodging them almost impossible. The human weapons were not just powerful, but also incredibly accurate, because their targeting systems could predict exactly where an alien ship would be by the time a projectile reached it, and even ships that tried to change course found themselves hit by tungsten rods that had been fired several minutes earlier when the human computers calculated their most likely escape routes. Admiral Sullivan coordinated the defense of Earth from her command center, while watching the tactical display that showed alien ships being destroyed faster than her crews could target them. And she realized that years of secret weapons development had paid off in ways that even the most optimistic projections had not predicted, because the aliens had made the fatal mistake of underestimating human ingenuity. The few alien ships that managed to escape the immediate battle zone found themselves pursued by projectiles that continued to hunt them, even as they fled toward the outer edge of the solar system. And several more ships were destroyed during their retreat, because the human railguns had such incredible range that they could engage targets anywhere within the solar system with deadly accuracy. Dr. Morrison felt a mixture of pride and horror as he watched the results of his life's work displayed on the tactical screens, because while he was glad that his railgun had helped save Earth from conquest, he had not fully understood just how devastating these weapons would be when used against living beings, until he saw entire alien ships disappear in flashes of light. The surviving aliens sent desperate communications to their homeworlds describing weapons that their science said should be impossible and requesting immediate reinforcements because they had encountered a species that posed a genuine threat to the established order of the galaxy and could not be conquered using conventional military tactics. General Vexthul transmitted an emergency message to the Galactic Council from his damaged ship as it limped away from Earth at maximum speed while trying to avoid the human projectiles that were still hunting his fleet, and his report contained words that had never been used before in any military communication, because no previous invasion had ever been stopped so completely by a supposedly primitive species. The humans had demonstrated that their understanding of physics was far more advanced than anyone had suspected, and their ability to accelerate matter to such incredible speeds using electromagnetic forces represented a completely different approach to weapons technology that rendered traditional defensive systems obsolete and forced a complete reevaluation of human capabilities. Kate Sullivan opened a new communication channel to broadcast a message to any remaining alien ships in the solar system, and her words were calm, but carried an unmistakable threat that made it clear that any future attempts at conquest would be met with the same devastating response that had just destroyed most of an invasion fleet in a matter of minutes.